strange feeling for me to walk around at this place, because normally I drive along here with 150 miles per hour.
Miles an hour sounds pretty fast, but it's only a number. Not even racing fans could imagine just how incredibly fast Formula One cars are. So we've set up a demonstration to show you. We're going to match a Formula One car against two road cars. This 1.6-litre Ford Sierra is amongst the most advanced road cars in volume production. It's a good car with fine road holding and handling, and the top speed is over 100 miles an hour. This is one of the fastest road cars you can buy, a Porsche 928. Top speed over 150 miles an hour, and road holding and handling is as fine as modern automobile technology can make it. James Hunt, world champion in 1976, is going to drive the Sierra, and John Watson, world champion runner-up in 1982, is going to drive the Porsche. To make this a bit more fun, we're going to give the two road cars a start. First, Hunt in the Sierra. Hunt is trying to be neat as he slides the car around the corner, because the neater you are, the quicker you are. We haven't forgotten the other two cars. I think, in fact, it's about time we started John Watson in the Porsche. The Sierra had a 35-second start, but here comes the Porsche, catching it up very well. Niki's finished his coffee, so maybe it's time to see if he can catch the other two. Incidentally, Niki's driving a pre-turbo car, about 250 horsepower down on the latest ones. And remember, we're comparing the cars from a standing start over 1 lap, and that's about 3 miles. You can see how easily the Formula One car beat the two road cars back to the start. Driving a Formula One car at racing speeds imposes tremendous stresses, G-forces, on the drivers. So each driver has a seat actually molded to his body, and he's held in place by a full safety harness. But his head, of course, is unsupported.
The problem in corners is only the neck, because the helmet is heavier than a cap, for example. So when you go through to a corner, your head is always moving outwards. And there are some circuits, like in Brazil, where the corners are banked. The G-force is getting so high nowadays that after, I would say, 30 laps, you can't hold your head straight because your muscles start to ache and they can't cope with the G-force.
Older racing cars were comparatively simple. Modern ones require many people to produce them. Their research, design, development and construction is very labor-intensive. For every man you see here, there are 30 backing him up. These cars are at the forefront of technology, yet when they leave the factory, they still aren't ready to race. Why? After all, your road car leaves its factory ready to use. That's because it's set up for average conditions. If we were to take even a car like this, which handles well, we could still improve it for this circuit. But then it might not handle so well on a bumpier circuit. There's no such thing as an average setting for a Formula One car. They're fine-tuned for each driver and each circuit they race on. The cars must be exactly right. Because in Formula One racing, hundredths of a second count. This is what practice for the race is about. It's not like a golfer practicing his swing or a tennis player working on his serve. Of course, the drivers are trying out their techniques, but most of all, they're finding the best combination of all the adjustments on the car.
So what I need is some more front wing, because it's understeering, especially in the high-speed corners. Or we take some of the rear wing, we're the last hole here, and we need to bleed the brakes because the pedal is quite soft.
They need to adjust their aerodynamic aids, the stiffness of different roll bars, the ride height of the car, different degrees of rebound on the dampers, minute variations of the angles of the wheels. All a giant interrelated jigsaw.
And less rear wing, yeah?
Yeah. Take one hole off the rear wing, please.
And when they talk about how their cars handle, they use two terms all the time, oversteer and understeer. It isn't only Formula One cars that are affected by understeer and oversteer. It affects road cars too. This Ford Cortina is actually a well-balanced car, but this skilled racing driver is going to throw it off balance deliberately. He comes into this corner a little too fast, and watch the back go. That's oversteer. This time, he's unbalancing the front of the car. Again, his approach into the same corner is a little too fast. And although the steering is on full lock, he goes straight on. And that's understeer. Formula One drivers want the car perfectly balanced, equal grip at front and rear. Their skill in setting up the car is in achieving this perfect balance, and it's a subtle business. For example, a car with nearly 50 gallons of fuel in it on the starting grid will feel very different during the course of the race as that fuel is used and the tank empties.
The good driver needs to know exactly what it takes to make the car well balanced all through the race. I mean, it's very easy to get a car which is very good in the beginning of the race, because you can practice this in practice. But then when the fuel comes out and the circuit changes and the tire changes, then it doesn't handle in the other half of the race.
The driver. Some parts of them can be surprisingly fragile.
The gearboxes of modern Formula One cars aren't the strongest, especially with all the turbo power available. So very often you do get problems with the gears. That means you can't get fourth gear, for example, very easy. So then it's really hard to change gear. You get blisters on your hands, and you really have to watch it not to destroy it even more. So then you have to be very careful changing in that particular gear, which is weak, to make sure it lasts until the end of the race.
Unlike a road car, the braking balance on a Formula One car, between front and rear, can be adjusted as you drive. It's very important to get this right, as a new driver found trying Niki's car.
If you lock rear wheels up, it's not very comfortable because you will start spinning right away. So you have to adjust your brake balance more towards to the front. And then you just practice starting braking later and later. And finally you will lock up one of your front wheels. Then you will put a little bit more to the back again to make sure you have the right brake balance. And then you are set up optimum for the particular circuit.
Formula One cars are very precisely calculated designs. Unlike road cars, there's no such thing as styling. Of course, there are rules that govern the size and total weight of the vehicle. But the whole shape of the car and some of its layout is determined by aerodynamics. It wasn't until the 1960s that designers became concerned with aerodynamics, and not until the 1970s that wind tunnels were used extensively. And aerodynamics is not concerned simply with reducing wind resistance, because designers soon discovered that you could use the airflow on top of the car to push it down going round corners, making it stick to the road better, and thus corner faster. An American, Jim Hall, first tried this idea with the sports racing car, the Chaparral, in 1967, by installing a wing at the back of the car. Formula One soon stole the idea. Wings quickly appeared, little ones at the front, bigger ones at the back. Aerodynamics had arrived. But you never get something for nothing, and wings created their own problems. The bigger the wing, and the more you angle it to create downforce, the greater the drag it causes. So you may be going faster through the corners because of the increased downforce, but you go slower down the straight because of the increased drag. It was in the late 70s that the brilliant English designer Colin Chapman and his Lotus team took aerodynamics a stage further. His Lotus 79 won 6 races before other teams began to use the same aerodynamic effect. Lotus used the air under the car to suck it down onto the track, giving a huge increase in cornering power, with only a small penalty in aerodynamic drag. This technique was described as ground effect. Designers had discovered a way to increase the weight of a Formula One car at high speed by more than the weight of this Rolls-Royce. This is what happens to the air under a ground effect car. From where it comes in at the front, it is carefully controlled to swoop down and through an inverted aerofoil shape. This alteration in speed automatically creates the effect of suction at the point where the air is going fastest. The faster the car goes, the more suction it develops. Let's take a look at what a modern Formula One car consists of. The Marlboro McLaren is particularly interesting, since it is the most successful Formula One car ever raced in a single season, winning 12 of the 16 events in 1984. Formula One cars don't have a chassis or frame. The front section is a stressed shell, which is made not from metal, but from a lighter and stronger material, carbon fiber. This is the section of the car with the front suspension and wheels bolted to it. It has to be totally rigid, and it's the section which carries the driver. Behind the driver is the fuel tank, and then the engine. Formula One cars not only have no separate frame, but unlike on a road car, the engine is not bolted into the car. The engine itself forms the back half of the car's structure, and the rear suspension is actually bolted onto the engine. Again, unlike on a road car, the gearbox is mounted right at the back. This not only improves weight distribution, but also means that it's very accessible for the mechanics to work on. Turbo is one of the trendy words of automobile technology in the 1980s. You can see the power the turbo produces, but how does it do it? Its principle is very simple. Usually, in a non-turbo system, as the exhaust gases leave the engine's combustion chamber, they just travel down the exhaust pipe and out into the air. But these gases are traveling pretty fast. Indeed, as the engine speeds up, they're traveling very fast. Just rev up your own road car and feel the pressure at the end of your exhaust pipe. This pressure is a kind of power, and it's normally wasted. In a turbo installation, the exhaust gases are diverted to drive a small turbine wheel. The exhaust pressure turns this wheel and then escapes back into the exhaust system on the other side of it. The small turbine wheel is connected to a compressor, which sucks in air and blows it into the combustion chamber of the engine under pressure. This means that more fuel is being pumped into the engine's combustion chamber, and the more fuel in there, the bigger the explosion, the greater the power. But every advance in design seems to carry some penalty, and the turbocharger is no exception. It has 2 problems. One is that it has little power at low speeds, because at low speeds, the exhaust gases are traveling slowly. So therefore, the turbine and compressor are traveling slowly. As the engine speeds up, the exhaust gases travel faster. So do the turbine and compressor. Then, the turbo is really working. But this means that there is not the instant response and wide power range of a non-turbo engine. High technology is needed to make turbo installations work. The exhaust pipes have to be made of high nickel alloys, virtually the only metal that won't melt at the heat generated and will stand the intense strain involved. Speed and heat are the enemy of the turbo. In a Formula One turbo engine, the compressor is likely to be running at up to 140,000 revolutions per minute, and the temperature at the hottest point will be 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit. If the temperature gets out of control, then the oil breaks down, the oil seals burst, and the result is fire. And fire is one of the most deadly hazards a racing driver can face. Okay, let's assume the car is set up as well as it can be, and suppose that in the race it's quick, but not actually in the lead. Then comes the real skill, overtaking another driver. These two identical Porsche 928s are ideal for a demonstration. This isn't like on the road, where you wait for an opportunity and accelerate past the car in front. Here, the guy in front doesn't want you to get past him. And two cars can be so evenly matched that over a lap they will be separated by as little as a few hundredths of a second.
Most overtaking is done on corners or when you approach them. The basic tactic is that you outbrake the other guy. If you can leave your braking just that fraction later, you may be able to get your nose in front. This is all extremely dangerous, and we have to rely on each other to give way at a certain moment. Our rule for ourselves is that when you see that the other man has braked later than you give way. If you don't, both cars may come off the road.
Of course, overtaking is very complex. What do you do, for example, when your car is faster through the corners, but has less power than another car?
Then you have to trail the car in front through the corners, and on the straight he powers away from you. Well, if you're lucky, you can use your knowledge of aerodynamics to pass him on the straight. If you get right behind him in his slipstream, there's a partial vacuum, a kind of hole in the air resistance made by his car. That means you can speed up beyond your car's normal maximum speed and maybe sneak past him. Of course, you may try to stop your opponent getting in your slipstream. But the psychological pressure on the driver in front in this situation is simply enormous. He knows that the smallest error and the man behind will slip past him.
Some drivers, on some days, can resist that pressure. On others, they can't.
You have to be ready basically for everything. Psychologically, you should never get into the areas where you don't feel well about driving or being anxious or you don't feel well. I think this is really wrong to start a race like this. So if you have to start under these conditions, you suffer so that the others will win, who are positive and quick and everything is good for them. So I think you have to try to get everything under control really before a big race. So the next time you're watching a Formula One Grand Prix at the track or on television, I hope what we have shown you will help to make the race more enjoyable.